it's well known that the media, the corporate media, lies a lot, and that they promote divisive race politics. And this has all kind of come to a head where there was a recent Hill report that suggested that nobody in America trusts the media. I wonder why that is. So, according to a survey...
The far right did this.
Yeah. According to a Reuters Institute survey encompassing 46 countries, the US media was one of the least trusted media sources in the world. Say, in Finland, you've got 65% of the people trusting the media. In Kenya, you have 61% of the people trusting the media. In the United States, you have 29% of people who have trust in the media. One Axios SurveyMonkey poll found that 8 in 10 independent voters believed that news organizations report news that they know to be fake, false, or purposely misleading. 92% of Republicans felt the way, and a majority of Democrats felt the same way about this. Which means that readers and viewers believe that mistakes we so often see, particularly in the political media that dominates the national landscape, are not happening because of human error, but as a convenient excuse offered up from left-leaning journalists when bombshell reports end up being false, fake, or purposely misleading. Now, there are just so many examples of this. Like, where would you like to begin?
Well, I'd like to begin just by mentioning as well that the UK, in every poll about European press trustworthiness, is dead last. So it's not also, I know some defenders will be like, yeah, well, Kenya's probably got a repressive media. Finland doesn't. It is not a problem of repression or free media. It is a problem with the Anglosphere and the culture among corporate media.
Yeah, and honestly, I think it's particularly the influence of radical left-wing politics that is playing into this extreme divisiveness along the lines of race, which we'll show shortly. But anyway, so we've got loads of examples of the lies. Russian collusion, anyone? Anyone? Miss Maddow? Anyone? Found nothing, obviously. 3-year investigation, millions of dollars wasted, nothing. Not a thing. What about the Russian bounties on US troops? Never happened. The COVID-19 theory that the virus may have come from a lab? Definitely not, except when it actually may have happened. And various other, it's not just the things they report either, it's also the things they don't report, such as the Hunter Biden laptop story and all of Hunter Biden's connections to Chinese interests, but never mind.
But this has been a long-running problem, and thanks to the Trump movement, let's say, it's become more and more obvious.
Yes. Yeah, the constant lying and misrepresenting of Donald Trump. Again, there's no point pointing out small examples when you have these mega examples that are just so big that it's quite staggering that the media would think that anyone should trust them at this point. But interestingly, the newspaper studied where the New York Times, Washington Post, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, Fox, MSNBC were all analysed on the TV front, and digital journalism was represented by Politico, The Blaze, Breitbart, BuzzFeed, Daily Caller, and the Huffington Post. So a good selection of both left and right-leaning outlets. And they came to the conclusion that, quote, the findings point to a gradual and subtle shift over time between old and new media toward a more subjective form of journalism that is grounded in personal experience and personal perspective, not exactly facts first, but feelings first, is the Hill's summary of it. This is what the journalism industry has become in the West. And there are great examples of this. This is from the Washington Examiner, criticizing the media for downplaying the Black Lives Matter riots while playing up the Capitol Hill riots. The Capitol Hill riots are a massively overstated issue, in my opinion. The police let them into the building. There was some violence. One of the rioters got shot. The rioters didn't kill anyone. That is fake news that was bandied around by literally all of the media outlets and politicians. Just turned out to not be true.
Carl, it was the new 9/11.
Well, our sacred democracy.
Also, violence in American politics, never heard of it until January 6th.
Yes, never happened before. And so the Washington Examiner are like, well, look, right, you complain about them attacking the Capitol, which I guess we can call it, and that's the most charitable interpretation of that. Not massively damaging to the building. Doesn't seem like a few smashed windows on the outside by masked agitators who were called Antifa by the crowd, but never mind. Comparatively, the Black Lives Matter riots that happened all across the summer in 2020, across 140 US cities, at least $1 billion to $2 billion paid in insurance claims, which sets a record that was that was previously set by the 1992 Los Angeles riots. In Minneapolis, George Floyd's death estimated that rioters caused damage to 1,500 businesses and $500 million in property damage. Again, just in Minneapolis. This happened in 140 cities. And of course, people...
Every single day egged on by Democratic politicians.
Yes. And then of course, you have the scenes in Portland where you have protests and riots for over 100 consecutive days. Damage is exceeding $23 million before the protests reached 100 days. And of course, federal buildings such as courthouses and police stations being vandalized, burned, and taken over.
Or
bombed. And that's not even including the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone and things like this. So it's no surprise that even Newsweek post an article like this. Riots, not protests. The media is gaslighting you. We know the media is lying. The media is telling on itself. Yes, actually, we are lying. This is from a conservative commentator who says this: the Pacific Northwest is under siege. Nightly riots overtake Portland. In Seattle, there are 3 costly and dangerous riots in just over a week. People are getting injured. Both businesses and public buildings are being destroyed and vandalized, and the media is pretending it's not really happening. Yes, because they're in favor of it. Politically aligned with the people doing the rioting. That's why. And everyone can see it. So allegations that the media is telling the truth? Who says that?
I mean, a best example would probably actually be MSNBC after the 2016 election, in which they spoke around after looking at the results. And who was it? I can't remember who it was, but they said, why did we become cheerleaders for the Clinton campaign? And you could see everyone in the room realizing, oh, God.
Was it Joe Scarborough?
Yeah, they realized, these left-wing journalists also looked at each other, and you could tell the atmosphere in the room was just, oh, God, we really are awful, aren't we?
Yes. And they really are. I mean, you could see it on the Clinton campaign where she had just a media, gaggle.
Harem.
Yeah, harem, yeah, that was on her plane following her around. And they were doing, viral videos with the media and representatives and stuff like that. It's like, okay, this is unreal, right? And so obviously it's no surprise that, 90+% of the coverage of Trump was negative, something along those lines. Almost all of it was negative. And the thing is, if it wasn't so obvious that they hated Donald Trump, and if it was just that, it'd be like, okay, so it's just Trump, right? For the rest of coverage in society, they're pretty normal. But that's not the case, right? There's an amazing thread by, again, that Libs of TikTok Twitter account, which honestly isn't long for this world. It's going to get suspended because it keeps making the establishment look ridiculous. We can go to the next one, John. You can see the source of the recent infographics that have been going around of just the comparative headlines. If we can just get these up, John, just so you can read them properly. The effect of the Black Lives Matter protests on the coronavirus cases explained. Coronavirus cases are increasing, but Black Lives Matter protests are not to blame. And then compared to the attack on the Capitol may have also been a super spreader event. Come on. Just how stupid do you think people are? But if we can just scroll down that thread, John, just to show how pervasive this problem is, right? So that's Vox. Go down. Oh, there we are. Forbes. Exactly the same problem. Exactly the same events talked about in exactly the same ways, with an obvious partisan bias defending the Black Lives Matter race riots against the Capitol Hill, democratic riots, the concerns about the integrity of democracy.
I'm happy to call it storming for this purpose.
Sure, yeah,
You can see there CNN, New York Times.
Yeah.
The one before I can't remember the name of, Insider.
Yeah.
Exactly the same narrative, exactly the same events.
CBS, just exactly. Continual. It's everywhere. Washington Post. Keep going down. Just scroll down a bit faster if you're right, John, because it keeps going.
That long?
ABC, CBN, The Verge, AP,
That's
Guardian, and then just Seattle Times, various. It just doesn't stop. Wall Street Journal. How many examples are needed? How many examples are needed to show the obvious partisan bias in favor of people who are just openly racists and have real problems with white people? And say it, to continually say, the right is never talking about race politics. They never mention race. They never bring this up. It's always the left that emphasizes constant racial grievances. And this is not new to the left. Go back 100 years. Obviously, the left is the party of race politics. Obviously. Don't want to talk about the movements that they started back then, though, do they? Disavowed all that, and now they've got a new kind of race politics. Race politics is against white people rather than in favor of them. I'm so sick of race politics. Anyway, so moving on to the media's promotion of race politics. critical race theory became something that everyone was like, hang on a second, this seems to be an outright attempt to generate deliberate racial divisions. And in fact, if you actually go and read their Bibles, their origins of their texts, you can read through it, and it's remarkable just how gross the critical race theorists are. For a start, they want they oppose the integration policies of the 70s. They oppose those, right? They are actually very much proponents of the separate but equal doctrine. They view themselves as a separate nation. The blacks are a separate nation within the United States, and so essentially are acting like they should be given their own parallel legal systems, which is one of the primary concerns. And of course, the way that voting works in the United States is a major problem for them. They want to have racial voting demographics, not individual votes in local areas, but instead like cross-terrain racial blocks that vote for their interests.
Very much like the Black Panthers, just
Yes.
on a, let's say, less state basis, but instead different legal systems.
Yeah, and they explicitly refer to the example of the Black Panthers, saying, well, look, the centrist liberals viewed the Black Panthers' race consciousness as being the source of racism, because it is, but we want to continue with that race consciousness, because race consciousness is the very basis of critical race theory, and that is, of course, also the very basis of racism. And so you get things like this in the New York Times. Oh, why is everyone panicking about critical race theory? Well, because it seems to be actively pathologizing black people and like treating white people and treating black people as if they are actually inferior to white people, which I think is personally unacceptable. I think that everyone should be governed by the same standard. I don't know why I have to say that.
But no, just redo that for a second. Why is the country panicking about segregation? It's
Yeah.
not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
It's exactly why people are
Yeah.
panicking about it, because it is exactly the same ideology that everyone thought they'd put to bed. They thought they'd abolished it, essentially, in the 60s and 70s.
Why is the country panicking about racial balkanization? That's what that is. And it's like, well, because that's a bad thing. Like, we don't want we don't want constant racial tensions being stoked up for no good reason, because there isn't. And everything the critical race theorists complain about happened literally 50 years ago. Like, they're all complaining about things that happened in the 60s and 70s and before. It's like, okay, those things were bad. They're not happening now. Stop whining about it. But anyway. So, anyway, you get these sorts of defenses. And here's just a piece from this. Once the domain of graduate schools, critical race theory is an intellectual tradition that emerged in the 1970s that sought to interrogate how the law produces and maintains racial hierarchy.
I'm just asking questions, bro.
Just asking questions about why the whites are oppressing the blacks and will and have forever. Because that's something that you really want black people to think, isn't it? It's not going to breed resentment from black people to whites and then just any other community, by the way. I mean, it's not like, Jews and Asians and Hispanics or anything else are having problems because of what is being done to these communities by the critical race theorists. They tend to share several key assumptions, says one law professor at Georgetown. Race is not a biological fact, but a social construction. Race is not aberrational, but an inherited ordinary feature of society. So racism. So all of society is racist. Racial hierarchy is primarily the product of systems, not individual prejudice. Racial progress is accommodated only to the extent that it converges with the interests of white people, and lived experience, not just data, constitutes relevant evidence to scholarship. So the assumption underpinning all of this is that black people are being racially oppressed by white people on a conscious level. White people are deliberately, through their institutions, which, I mean, you may say, well, what about like in Detroit or Baltimore, where these institutions are majority black controlled? Be like, hey, shut up, white supremacist. The institution itself is a product of the white racial consciousness and therefore is designed to oppose black people and oppress black people. That's the critical theory position.
Well, that's also how you get such amazing takes as black man beats up Asian man. Yeah, but he lived in America, therefore white supremacy
That's
is this.
exactly how they get to that consequence. And of course, this means that all white people are racist. And so you get people like Roman D'Angelo who just come out and say, hi, I'm a racist. And I'm really scared that I'm treating black people badly because of my racism. It's like, okay, have you considered not being a racist? But of course, she feels she can't help it. Anyway, people like Christopher Rufo have been doing a great job on this. Christopher Rufo, James Lindsay, lots of good people doing stuff on this. And he gives us a definition of critical race theory that's actually honest and speaks to the actual essentials of it. He says, critical race theory is an academic discipline formulated in the 1990s, which is where it is properly formulated, but it does have its origins in the 70s and critical legal scholarship, built on the intellectual framework of identity-based Marxism. Relegated for many years to universities and obscure academic journals, over the past decade, it has been increasingly the default ideology in our public institutions. It has been injected into government agencies, public schools, teacher training programs, and corporate human resources departments in the form of diversity training programs, human resources modules, public policy frameworks, and school curricula. Totally correct. Absolutely 100% correct. That's exactly what it is. And the essential nature of the description and definition there, notice how the defense of critical race theory is, well, here are a few things that they happen to agree on. It's like, sure, you can say, well, like men and women are exactly the same. Why? Because they've got 2 arms and 2 legs. It's like, sure, but that's not speaking to the essential difference between them. Whereas Christopher Rufo is calling it a framework of identity-based Marxism, because that is what it is. Kimberly Crenshaw is one of the progenitors of critical race theory, and of course, she's very proud. This is just an interview in Vanity Fair, a puff piece in Vanity Fair, calling Kimberly Crenshaw the mastermind genius behind all of this, and how she's weathering the culture wars that she helped stoke. Just came about though. White people in it. Anyway.
I mean, imagine this coming from a Klan member.
Yeah, this...
Being like, well, I caused this racial war, and now, I don't know, I'm suffering because of it.
Well,
please donate to my Patreon.
Well, listen to this. I don't think this is about a real difference in opinion, nor is it a debate that it is winnable. This is about a weapon they're using to hold on to power. Sounds like warlike rhetoric, doesn't it? You have a weapon...
Rejecting your racism.
Rejecting her racism is a weapon to hold on to power. And so presumably, her racism is a weapon with which to seize power. Or else why are we even having this conversation? But anyway, so obviously her assumptions about the United States is as a white supremacist country, which means all white people in the Americas are racist and have a direct racial interest in oppressing black people for some reason. And so you can see critical race theory and critical race consciousness in action through some of the wonderful clips that Mythicist Milwaukee chaps have dug up for us. And these are just awful. Let's watch.
Bro, how's it feel knowing that push comes to shove, like your skin's kind of nice?
What?
Just watch.
I don't know. I mean, it makes me feel like sad because, like, God knows I don't deserve it. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't choose to be white, so like, you know what I mean? Like, it makes me upset that, like, my brothers and sisters of like other races can't like experience those things for something that I didn't like. I didn't do anything to like deserve that. You know what I mean? So like, I don't know. It just makes me upset.
So this is the problem with white people. The question then becomes is what should we do? So there are all sorts of white people sitting, Sean.
Yep.
There are all sorts of white people sitting out here in the class right now saying,
What's
so
good,
what
John?
should I do?
Do you think that's appropriate? Do
No.
you think that's right? Do you think that fosters racial unity when the teachers in front of a class of hundreds of kids get a white kid and a black kid up and say, right, black person, you're being oppressed because of your race. The white person's got all of these privileges. White person, I want you to feel bad about this. Black person, who knows what you feel about it?
Sociologist professor there being like, yeah, sociology is a science.
Yeah.
This is obvious kook nonsense.
Yeah. And of course, this doesn't just hurt the black children and students, which it obviously does. Teaching them that they are literally inferior and second-class citizens, probably unethical, I would suggest. I really, really think that's bad, actually. But never mind. Anyway, let's see what the teachers think about what happens to the white kids.
I also think that, and there's some studies that have borne this out a little bit, that we don't actually, we have to support our classrooms and our student bodies in navigating racial tension if that starts to show up because white kids are feeling like, oh, I'm only always the bad guy. Like we have to, which is why we need those anti-racist models and to just have that conversation. But in terms of their development, this is going to sound really counterintuitive, especially if you're a parent. We actually, there's a number of studies that suggest we shouldn't be worrying too much about making white kids feel bad because they get so much false messages about their goodness that it's actually kind of critically important for them. Now, we don't want to induce shame, right? Which is why they need those models. They need to say, yeah, white people can do racial justice too, right? Here's some examples. So we don't want to introduce shame, and there's a tricky line, and we don't want to cause racial tension where then they have no way to enter the diversity conversation. And so we need to talk about anti-racism with them. We need to give them those models. But we also actually need to, it's good for them to feel a bit, like white guilt is a really big problem. And my goal as a parent is to get my kids into white guilt and beyond it as young as possible. Because white adults are running around with white guilt, and we're stuck. White guilt has to happen. It's a developmental need. If you believe in equity and you live in this kind of system and you're white, you're going to hit white guilt. So in my mind, I'm like, I need my 4-year-old to experience white guilt so I can support her out of it and beyond it. And I don't want her doing it when she's 20. I want her to be well past that point.
Can you even imagine how awful that must be for those children?
A sick, evil cultist.
Yes.
It's disgusting.
And that's what the media is defending and promoting when they're promoting and defending critical race theory and Black Lives Matter and all of these other radical left-wing movements. This is just so obvious, and it's not surprising to me at all that people think the media are a bunch of liars and race grifters that are pushing division. If you enjoyed this segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can watch the full broadcast live every weekday at 1 PM UK time on lotuseaters.com.